Hey everyone, welcome to episode 21 of Open Books with Alana and Erin, two female leaders modernizing the accounting and leadership space. So today is a topic that it was super close to, I guess, me and I think you as well, probably a lot of leaders, but that's how susceptible leaders are to burnout. So we're going to explore how somebody reaches a burnout stage, how we can help ourselves from avoiding burnout, and then also helping to identify burnout in our team members and how we can support them through that time.
Yeah.
I mentioned this is, I would say, a close subject for me. I think about 3 years ago, I really experienced like the true meaning of burnout. And when I was going through it, I didn't really realize what it was. And then kind of on the other side of it, I was like, I was going through true burnout. And I think what's interesting about burnout itself is I think there's maybe the misconception that it just means you've worked a little too much and, you just need to take a day off and recover and you'll be back good as new. But what's interesting is true burnout, it can be short, but a lot of times it's a lot of buildup. And then you're not just repairing and recovering yourself in one day. Like,
definitely.
You are, it takes a while to come back from it for sure. And it's that feeling of like, it's just not going to get better.
Yeah.
And you're just working at such a wild pace that you're just completely done.
So I went through something similar at about the 3 years ago mark. Yeah. I don't know if I've exactly said when I left the larger firm, but it was about 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And I think we all had burnout from COVID.
Sure.
And that was compiled upon like everything else.
Yeah.
And because that's exactly when I experienced my burnout, and then went to work for a tech company and recovering from that burnout. I mean, I worked at the tech company for about 10 months.
Yeah.
And that whole time was basically recovery from just being so burnt out. And I didn't recognize it at the time until I was working at the tech company and like, oh my gosh, I'm still like dreaming about my past work and all of that. But if I find it fascinating, I think a lot of people went through a stage of burnout as COVID was kind of ending, or still kind of in the middle of it, but because there was so much other stuff going on in the external world that it just piled on the pressure even more.
It totally did. Yeah. And I think so many people were trying to like run each day from things that were piling up. And then while mine wasn't like necessarily related to COVID instances themselves necessarily, it was like, it was just a perfect storm for me at that time as well. It was wild to experience and then be on the other side.
Yes.
Mine definitely took a while to recover from. And I think today, like I feel like I'm over it and have recovered, but we'll go into it on how we can continue to identify it and not get back to that place that we both were at 3 years ago.
Definitely.
For sure. So in what ways do you feel like leaders are susceptible to burnout?
I would say all leaders, no matter your leadership style, we're all susceptible to that burnout, because so much of our looking at things is looking at other people, not necessarily caring about ourselves. And I kind of stole that from you. Yeah. But I want to say I think servant leaders are even more so susceptible than other leadership styles because we are so focused on making sure that our team is successful. We aren't necessarily looking back at ourselves. We also, in the effort to make our team successful, we take on a lot of problems or issues or those things that maybe our team can't handle. And so we're just like, well, I will handle this for each of our team members. Yeah. And that compression just really exacerbates the potential for burnout. the type of work that we're performing as well. Days full of meetings with our team are just mentally and emotionally draining, which isn't a bad thing in itself. It's just how it is. That's kind of my feelings regarding burnout. But why do you think we're susceptible?
I would agree that it's definitely right because we're pouring so much into our team members. I also think it's because as a leader, you're generally at a higher level technically as well. And so not only are you leading team members, but you probably also have higher client work to do. You are doing the things that nobody else can do, both leadership wise and technical wise. And so I find not only is it the balance with leadership, but then also trying to manage the technical load, that you generally have higher level clients, things that can't be put off. You have a lot of deadlines. You don't have anyone necessarily to turn to for those deadlines because you are who people turn to for the deadlines. I also think just leadership in general, if we're responding to something, it's generally like the important and urgent quadrant that we're working in. And because of that, working in that quadrant at such a higher volume, I think that naturally just leads to burnout because everything is urgent and important. And so you have to pick between like missing a deadline and maybe taking care of yourself, I would say. So I think it's just a mix of the pace we work at and the level we're working at as leaders.
I hadn't really thought about that technical side. Yeah. Because it's just like, oh, it's just the stuff I do, right?
Yep.
But it is at a higher technical level. And I find a lot of the stuff that I'm doing is troubleshooting work, which is usually pretty intense technically, contacting multiple people for if it's like a tech issue, finding out where the breakdown is. It is when I compare it to the work I was doing maybe 5 years ago, keying in bills or running a payroll, like that, I could do that. But the troubleshooting side of things, while very fun, I find, is also very stressful at times, especially if there is a deadline.
Yes.
So I'm glad you brought that up because I hadn't really thought of it as something that contributes because it's just like, that's just the work.
That's what you do.
Yeah. But it can definitely add on there.
Yep, it absolutely can. And I think too, you might have team members who are working on higher level stuff, but like it's just like trickling down, right? And so by the time it gets to you, you're just trying to manage very high level things.
Yeah.
Like I said, which one do you prioritize when everything needs to get done, which we've talked about in prior episodes.
Definitely.
It never really works out.
I should go back and re-listen to that because I need the reminders.
Right? Yep, I think so.
So what do you do to try to avoid burnout? Or if you know, like, okay, I know like we're coming up on a really busy time. What do you do to try to avoid that?
So I, since going through like burnout and still staying in public accounting after that, I have really I understand that the work compression ebbs and flows based on like deadlines and things that are coming up. So, I've tried to, in times where it's a little bit less deadline, when there's like less deadlines coming up, maybe for a couple weeks or things don't feel as compressed, I try to put a major cap on my hours and just become more flexible with my week. I used to have a lot of guilt with that, but it's like it'll come back around. Like the deadlines are there. If today I can sneak away at 4:30, I'm going to. So I've started to take advantage of that. But then also, even in times of compression, I always try to have one full day off a week.
Yeah.
And I didn't do that before. And it like a full day off is so huge. Just to allow my brain to totally disconnect. Sometimes leading up to a larger deadline, that doesn't always happen. But I mean, we've talked about it. I just do better work when I have a full day off, right? I also, continuing my journey with leadership, the amount of meetings I have per day is wild.
Yeah.
I can be in meetings, much like you, 5 to 7 hours a day, 5 days a week.
Yep.
Like it is crazy how fast they fill up. And I didn't realize how much that was adding to just my feeling of like, holy cow, when am I going to get stuff done? So I'm trying to put a cap on number of meetings and then also the quantity of hours I'm in meetings. That one's a little bit harder to catch because before you know it, you look at tomorrow and it's like, oh, I have 8 meetings.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to figure out how to catch that better. But what about you? What are some things that you try and do to avoid burnout?
I think the first step for me when I realized I was experiencing burnout and like thinking about what I want to try to avoid in the future is just acknowledging what the triggers are that really push me towards that burnout stage. And one of them is meetings, for sure. I had to set a cap of really, I try to keep it to 2 one-on-one meetings in a given day. There can be other meetings like client meetings or general, like a full team meeting, but one-on-ones, 2, 3 at the absolute most. Sure. If I have 3 on top of the regular work, I am exhausted by the end of the day, and none of my work from that last meeting to the end of the day is good. Like, it's just not. So recognizing, like, if I do have 3, okay, I'm going to cut my hours a little short today. I might work a little extra on the next day that I know I have fewer meetings and I can get through stuff. But that was a big thing. The meetings are just so draining, which isn't bad. Like, it's good that I'm having those conversations, and I value those conversations so much. But recognizing that too many of them in one day is not it for me. So there's that, and then learning where my boundaries should sit, like that. No more than 3 one-on-ones in a day. I like to spend some time on Sunday going through my email, doing any like technical work that I need no interruptions. Because that works really well for me and my family and our schedule. I keep Saturday as pretty much my day off, but having kind of those strict boundaries is what makes it successful for me. It is harder, though, to stick with those deadlines or those boundaries when deadlines are right around the corner.
It is.
So, but also like acknowledging that, okay, this week I'm going to go beyond my boundary, but then next week I'm going to cut down those hours a bit more and to make up for it. And knowing that that's what I'm going to do and sticking to it helps a bit with that.
Totally. Yeah. And I think in that regard, I travel quite a bit as well, just around the state, but then I also travel to other states as well. And one thing I've started to do, the travel takes up a lot of time because of full travel days. And then I know wherever I'm going, like, I have time in the hotel at night, but I'm so burnt out because I might be with clients all day or whatever it might be. So I've also started to limit my travel during the year. Last year I traveled a lot. I have a lot of travel coming up in quarter 4 as well. I think it's like every other week right now.
Wow.
And I'm trying to see what I can pull back on. But for a few of them, it's like, this can be virtual. I'll be there virtually. I just can't take the travel days. So in that regard, they're kind of similar to meetings, right? But trying to pull back on just that time spent, that is leading to the burnout.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Travel is a whole other, whole other thing. When you're traveling, you aren't at your regular computer. Right. You're usually working off of a laptop, which is not great for your like back and everything. So it just is physically draining, and you're probably not sleeping as well.
Totally.
It all adds up.
Yep.
But limiting travel helps.
It totally does.
I can definitely tell a difference from when I was with the large firm and having to travel at least once a month, if not more, to other locations, to now being remote. I still travel, but it's like 4 times a year.
Sure.
And that has made a huge difference.
That's good.
So
that
yes,
helps.
limit your travel if
Yeah,
you
for
can.
sure. Yeah, we'll get there. So what are some ways that you help support your team either in identifying burnout for themselves or once you notice they are in burnout, then giving them coping mechanisms?
So this has been something that I've learned because it is very different going from an on-site team to a virtual team.
Sure.
And it's, I think, harder to recognize when my virtual team members are getting close to burnout or experiencing it. Usually I can tell by their lack of participation in our Slack channels. We're very active in like our pets channel, and we have one that's just the water cooler. We have a memes one,
Yeah.
and there's conversation in those every day. So I can usually tell if someone isn't pretty active in there throughout several days, something might be going on.
Yeah.
But I can see that, like I can see their activity, but this is one of the big reasons why I have scheduled one-on-ones every week with the team, because I don't get to see them in person. I don't just see them walking down the hallway or anything. So having those scheduled one-on-ones lets me connect with them, see their body language since we're all on webcams, and try to identify that. But it's really it's pretty obvious when you're in a team meeting and normally they're participating or laughing or something and you don't get that response. And that's when I usually find that they're in the like experiencing something, and then to support them, it's a lot of conversation. Most of it is around them setting boundaries and them knowing that leadership is okay with them setting boundaries. So helping them define their own triggers, what boundaries they need to set in place. Sometimes they just need to talk, and that's okay. But that's my remote team. How do you notice it in a physical location?
Yeah, well, and so mine's interesting because I'm very much hybrid. While I do have people on site, like 70% of my team is remote as well. And so I always worried in the beginning that I was going to be more connected with my in-person team. But I really think I found a good balance between both of them. I think a lot of it is just learning their general disposition and then just taking note of any variances, which I think is so important with the servant leadership that it's the reason you really want to get to know your team because then you know where their baseline is and it can help you identify it like, okay, this person generally would be like talking to me about anything but work right now and they're not. So then digging into it, like you said. I think also, Aaron, I just brain farted.
No, you're good.
Sorry. You're gonna have to cut this out. Sorry.
No, you're good. I should start it off with a question for you though, because then it looks it's easier to cut and come back.
So maybe ask, how do I support team members when you notice they're experiencing burnout?
Okay.
Okay.
So you've identified some team members who maybe are in the early stages of burnout, or maybe a little further along. How do you support them through that?
So I usually, which we'll talk in our next episode, but ask some more questions to them. Because like you said, it's them setting their boundaries and then leadership supporting that. So I think, asking them what they need. I have some team members who have really defined what their workday looks like. And so they leave at lunch, right? And they get a whole lunch hour. So that's a boundary they put in, which I've learned a lot from. I think that's really incredible. But I think it's just asking questions of what they need and then supporting, what that looks like for them, I think is really important.
That kind of leads into one of our recurring segments of what have I learned. And I have learned that asking those questions again and again, we'll talk about this in our next episode, is very important, and understanding when a team member needs to vent and just get it out and then is okay versus when they want help coming up with a solution.
Sure.
I know I go through times where I just need to get it off my chest. And then like, okay, I'm good. My tea kettle whistle went and now I'm fine. I'm having a nice cup of tea.
Yeah.
But I want to be able to do that for my team. And I think servant leaders, especially, we hear something and immediately want to start solving.
Yeah.
So I think it's important for us to ask our team, do you want to just vent or do you want to find a solution? Or maybe you want to vent right now and next time we can talk about a solution or something like that. And that's kind of what I've learned from my team and what they need is they don't always want help finding a solution. They just need the space.
Yeah.
So what would you say you've learned from your team or a mentor?
Yeah. So I've learned from a colleague when it comes to burnout, nobody's going to say no for you. And like we can talk all day long about how, no, I put boundaries in and I say yes to the things I want to do and I say no to the things I don't want to do. That's harder and it's easier said than done to actually when an opportunity is in front of you and to say no. Mm-hmm. That is very hard and takes a lot of self-reflection to say no to something that you generally would say yes to. But yeah, nobody is actually going to come in and say, well, I know you really don't want to do this, but you said yes. Nobody's going to do that, you know? So it's really on us to identify things we want to do, things we need to say no to, and actually say no.
Something I think women in general, I would say, also need to recognize is that no is a complete sentence.
Yes.
So you don't have to justify it or have backing. You can say no, and that's okay. But I totally agree. Like, it is so hard to recognize that, like, that's okay. You don't need to give all the background and the justification for everything. It's just, no, not right now. That doesn't work. And that's okay.
Totally. Yeah.
Oof.
Yeah.
Hard though.
Yeah. Easier said than done for sure.
Definitely.
So with burnout, what is something that you would tell yourself earlier on?
That burnout is not failure.
Oh, yeah.
It may be a failure of me to set boundaries or failure to recognize, but it is not personal failure. Like your value does not go down as a person because you're experiencing burnout. And I don't think we know when we're experiencing burnout. Like now that I've been through it, I recognize it a bit more, but I still don't know if I would fully recognize it in the time. But when I experienced it 3 years ago, and I'm pretty sure I experienced it kind of up and down throughout my years in public accounting, but any kind of burnout or feeling overwhelmed or anything like that was a personal failure of my own. And like, I was failing because I couldn't deal with my own feelings and not thinking that you're such a failure and beating up on yourself is not helping anyone. If anything, it's exacerbating everything.
Totally.
So I would go back and tell myself that it's not a failure on your part. Your value does not decrease as a person because you are experiencing burnout. Yes, we need to work on some things, but that's okay. We learn through it all. So that's what I would tell my younger self, and I'll probably continue to tell myself now. You can't help but feel a bit like a failure that you failed to manage your own burnout. So
totally,
it does not affect your worth as a person.
It doesn't
or
at
your
all.
value or anything. I need to just keep repeating that as a mantra. How about you? What would you tell your young Alana?
I would tell myself early on to strike a balance between work and finding things outside of work. I love what I do, and early on, I knew I was loving what I was doing. I continue to love it. I find that I can fully engulf myself in work. And so even if I'm not at the office, I might be listening to some sort of podcast on the way to meet my husband or thinking through some strategy while I'm cleaning my house. Like if I don't keep tabs even on my like thought process, I will find myself drifting towards trying to solve something at work just because it is my downtime and I have an open mind, right? And that's generally when you start to be a little bit more creative and think through some challenges, which is fantastic. And I'm never going to change that.
Right.
But to also give myself other things to focus on, helps me then come back to work stronger as well. So just striking up more of a balance, just to create that mental clarity a little bit better is so important.
I love that you said that because it is so easy, especially as you're young, entering your career or moving from like staff accountant to a leadership position. You are giving everything. You're in that whole hustle culture mindset. And it is so important to have something outside of work that you are interested in, active in, whatever it is. Go do roller derby. I tried that. It was painful, but it was fun. But it got me out of the out of that like hustle. I need to do everything. Anything that can kind of suck you out of there and give you space, because it does. I love that you brought up the creativity and how I think we are able to think more creatively about our problems, about the issues that are going on. When you give your brain that space, you can think of more unconventional ways to solve issues. And you're kind of thinking about work, but also like it's not pressure.
Completely. And what I think is interesting, especially as you move like deeper into leadership, when you start out, like everything you do is most of the things you do are technical, and this is how you do it correctly. This is how you complete a tax return correctly. This is what your work papers look like in your tax return. But then as you continue on, and you have to start thinking about strategy for your service line and how, the dynamic between teams and, how to reorganize, and you have to be strategic or creative for those type of things. But also that's kind of twofold, because then you catch yourself, I might be watching a TV show with my husband and all of a sudden I have thought about 8 things we need to do, in the next 5 years for work.
Oh my gosh.
And it's like, wow, you kind of sometimes miss those days of like, if I'm not in the software, and working on the technical problem, that's all my mind can think about. Right. So I catch myself really, my mind drifting, or even if I'm at an event or something and somebody, asks what I do, and then I start talking about it, and then I just sit and think about, okay, now I gotta, here's what we're doing in the future. And it's just funny how you catch yourself without realizing it, trying to solve the problems.
I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, because creativity, great, but also you shouldn't be thinking about work at this time.
Exactly.
Oh, that's so funny.
Well, and I have a husband who he's familiar with public accounting, and so we'll just talk about public accounting in general, and then we've spent like an hour and a half talking about the industry. This is not we've got to find something else. And we have plenty to talk about, but it's like, geez.
The benefits of having a husband separate from the industry at all. Yep. He's like, I know the word reconciliation.
Yeah. I have a checkbook. Yeah. Yeah. Good and bad, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Too funny. Cool. Thanks, everyone, for tuning into Open Books. We aim to share insights gained from our past and future experiences to foster growth within the accounting and leadership communities. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all.